Pike, architect from Pike Architects, played a major role over the last 50 years in urban planning and housing, but also involved in other building types and projects across the world, basically, UK, Europe, Middle East, North Africa, and playing a continuing role in the Royal Institute of Architects of Ireland since the 60s, president in the beginning of the 2006, and currently a director of Tuath Housing Association for the last 10 decades, in fact. Richard is a financial expert, also a director of Tuath. He's worked on this rent and save financial model for affordable housing, focusing on the delivering housing as rent to buy at a cost substantially below market rent, while keeping the land in state hands. So again, it's bringing in these various different ideas which actually come together in this particular theory. So I'll let James start off here. Thank you.
Right, thank you. So I've obviously been involved in all the problems and tasks in dealing with this whole question of housing and its increased impact of the cost of housing on how people live. But I've also been involved in a number of environmental issues. So I would have met the Institute or the Committee for Developing Environmental Sustainability, which unfortunately only existed for a few years in the 2000s. But for that body, I wrote a pamphlet on living over the shop. So I've very much been focused on trying to get buildings reused and then getting people to live back in the cities, in the towns and cities. So I think that's an absolutely crucial bit, and it's obviously reusing quantities. But from the key point of view, it's the cost of housing, the whole financial impact of that. I've been trying to work on that for a number of years in parallel. And it's really looking at those equity partnerships and other ideas that have developed on with various financial experts to the model we now have. With this, I've been working in housing, associated with housing associations for a long time. And I reckon they have a wonderful role. In fact, I was involved in the very introduction of housing associations back in the 1970s when the Archbishop of Dublin tried to bring them in. They were accepted early in the 1980s, and it certainly started out. But then the whole emphasis seemed to be against social housing, and they grew very little, and the whole building of social housing, which had been at least half the program of building back in the 60s and 70s, disappeared. I mean, they'd fallen right back. So this was a key area. So luckily, over the last 10 years at least, the housing associations have been encouraged to get involved, and Tuath perhaps has been maybe the lead force in that. It's gone from having about 1,000 dwellings back in 2012 when it was set up to nearly coming up to 10,000 there this year. So it's really growing at a very fast rate, and I think it's a very important component in the whole field of social housing, but it's also all those main housing associations are now getting involved in affordable housing. So this is a model we've tried to set up. Now my son is an expert on finance. I have been working with one or two other experts initially, but he's taken it on, and I think he really has produced something which can make a very substantial financial impact on the affordability of housing. I'll hand it over to Richard.
Okay, thanks. All right, so a lot of the summary has been given already. What we're trying to do is figure out a way of delivering long-term affordable housing to people who want to buy and own their properties. Okay? A lot of the inputs have been discussed earlier: the cost of land, a little bit the cost of building, the access to finance, and so on and so forth. So we've got a group of people from Tuath, finance, legal, and so on, put their heads together to try and figure out this, and this is happening right now. Literally, we're doing working groups as we speak. And we've talked to various parts of the government, the LDA, and the Housing Finance Agency. We know the challenges, so there's no new news probably in all of that from what we've talked about today. So the idea is, can we come up with a way of getting ownership into the hands of people, but by cutting out a lot of the middlemen and the little 0.5% here and 0.5% there, such that the whole end game is affordable, and basically allowing those people to live and invest in their own communities. So what's the summary of the way an occupier of one of these properties would work? So basically, we can get them properties at 70% for a monthly payment, which is equivalent to 70% the cost of a rental. Okay? And their money basically would only go up, the cost of that will only go up by inflation over 30 years. Okay? And the portion they pay every month is effectively in two bits. One goes into rental of the property, okay? And the second piece goes to buying the property. So that over the 30 years, they will basically buy their entire house without needing to go to a mortgage or anything else. Okay? So two bits to their payment. They make the one payment, but it gets split into two. One is to service the apartments or whatever the area. One is to pay the site value tax or site owner, and so on and so forth. And then the other one is to buy the property. So at the end of the term, they own the property. Okay? And then the idea then effectively what we call it is rent and buy, or rent and save. So you're effectively using your savings to buy the property over time. Okay? The idea, one of the key benefits here is that the idea is that the land is state-owned or DCC-owned or whoever, right? But they don't sell the land to the property developer or the people who are organising this. They hang on to the land and they get a rent. So not unlike the ground rents idea of Emer, right? The state remains in control, and gets an income, 5% every year. Okay? And the benefit then in terms of the occupier is they don't have to pay up a big fee up front to buy the property. They're buying at a lower amount over time. Okay? The state itself doesn't have to fund the property development, right? They're giving it to an AHB or whoever to build it, so there's no cost. But they still get the income and they still have control. They still own the underlying land. So if something goes crazy wrong, they can get the land back. Okay? And obviously the people that are owning the houses over time are encouraged, because they're going to be owning, not renting, they're encouraged to invest in their own community and make a community. Okay? That makes sense. So let's just explain how the money flows a little bit to make it a little bit clearer. So we have the occupiers, okay? They pay their monthly payments. In this example, the Tuath, which is the AHB that myself and my father are involved in, okay? So let's say Tuath, and their job is to find the people, right? The right people to be tenants or to be affordable buyers, and then to also maintain the overall properties and then collect the money every month. That's Tuath's job. They remit that money to a trust, which owns the actual properties to begin with. What the trust has done is it has basically rented on a long-term lease, like a 999-year or 200-year lease, from the state this piece of land. They have then borrowed from the capital markets, from the financiers, to build the property, okay? And they then pay them back over time, over 30 years, okay? And the occupiers themselves, as I said, when their money comes in, the trust puts that aside, and that money is used to pay off the investors, such at the end of the 30 years, those people over here own the property. If you stay in the property, pay your money over for 30 years, you will then own the property. You will own the leasehold, so you still don't own the land, it's still owned by the government or whoever owns the land in the first place, and you pay a 5% to them, a bit like you here. But you own the property. And you never got a mortgage, you didn't have to put a deposit down, nothing, you just paid your money every month. And that money was actually less than what would cost you to rent a property next door. Does that make sense? So let's look at a real example. We did 4, just to test the model a bit. So we were leasing the site, we took 4 sites. One at Bonham Street, which is being built, nearly built, I think. It's being built at the moment. One in Crumlin, one out in Tipperary, and one in Little Square, outside the city. Okay, so a good mix of inner city and rural and sort of suburban models. This was the cost to build them, so we got them from CISCs. So this is the total cost, and the cost changes depending on the property type and property size. This then was the cost, total cost, both the rental and the buy part for the occupiers. And this was the comparison to the local rent market. So as you can see, it doesn't work for rural, because in rural the rents are still quite low. Okay? But it does work in all the other cases. So again, remember, this is compared to rent what you're buying. Okay? So I actually think if it made 100%, people would still do it because you're buying instead of renting over the long term. So from a point of view of the occupiers, it makes really good financial sense. The question we get asked constantly is, why does it work? Why is it so cheap? Right? People don't believe it. There are your reasons. Number one, you've no mortgage costs, right? I know about this because I'm in the banking space. The bank has to pay for its money, it has to pay for its capital, and it has to make a profit. Okay? So that's why our mortgages rates are quite high. If you save money, put it in Irish Life or anywhere else, they will take another percentage off you, right? So you're saving, but they're taking a payment. So there's 2 sides of middlemen that are not taking any money off you. There's no funding providers, no people in the middle taking bits of this. You're going straight to the capital market, you're going straight to a pension provider or a big insurance company. Okay, so there's no one in the middle. No developer cost. The developer is building the properties, right, for the AHB and giving them, they maybe make a small profit, but that's it. It's an agreed development. You know, they build it. So there's no developer as such. And there's no other middlemen, there's no estate agents, no anyone else, right? So it's nice and simple in terms of that. And actually, when you take out all those people taking a little 0.5%, you save an awful lot of money. And one of the key ones is that mortgage idea. That instead of most, you know, when you get a mortgage, you basically buy the house now, borrow the money now, and you're paying off over time. So you're paying interest on that money. Yeah? This is the other way around. Okay? You never pay interest on the money. Okay? Your money is just going to pay off the thing. It's an upside down mortgage. And that makes a huge saving to any of us who have mortgages, huge amount of money going out to the bank. Okay? So, we've proven in the model that it's an efficient way of funding affordable housing. Alright? It can actually be used with other government agencies. We've talked to the LDA and various people. The trust, as we call it, could be anything. It could be the LDA, it could be the government themselves, it could be an AHB, it could be a trust here. Doesn't matter. It doesn't have any special needs. The model leaves the land in state hands. So the state or the Dublin City Council or whoever owns the land still owns the land. Okay, so they still have control of the sorts of communities that are built there if they want to. Could be private. Could be a private landlord as well, absolutely. And it provides, most importantly, occupiers a way to save and purchase the properties without the need for mortgages. Okay, thank you very much.
So, Katia Papkovskaia, she's speaking as a member of the Dublin Democratic Planning Alliance, an alliance supported by more than 65 neighbourhood associations, communities, and many individuals across the Dublin area who promote housing and sustainable development. And she's going to talk about the importance of the role of the citizen and the significance of the development plan, which takes us right back to the beginning, where we were hearing from Dermot about the significance of the development plan and how it's interfered with, etc. You know, where does democracy lie in all that? Where does democracy lie in inequality that Owen was talking to us about with rents and all the rest of it? So I'll just see if I can.
To form the future successfully, we must have a common purpose. So I'll start with a quote from Fred Scott from his book A Multi-Architecture. The city is in our head, Any language would be exhausted if one tried to describe its actuality. Many hands make the city: the builders, the legislators, the developers, both public and private, the traffic and railway engineers, the services engineer, the architect, the designer, the anonymous dead. It is the greatest manifestation of the collective spirit. The citizens' allegiance to their city contains its definition. To their respective denizens, all cities are eternal. Dublin Democratic Planning Alliance. We are citizens concerned for the future of our city. The Dublin Democratic Planning Alliance represents 65 residents, associations and civic groups across Dublin. That's shown on this map. We are campaigning for a more sustainable model of growth and delivery of housing and urban design in Dublin. Dublin's growth, expansion and densification have become led by centralised policies, which now exclude the citizen. New housing development does not appear to be considered in the context of its surrounding fabric or local needs. It neither improves existing communities nor creates new ones. Jointly, the development plans of Dublin City Council, Limerick Down County Council, Fingal and South Dublin County Councils represent a cohesive master plan for Dublin and a social contract between the citizen and the state. The city provides the services, infrastructure and amenities. In exchange for permission to build and extract profit from the land, the developers are asked to contribute towards sustainable growth of the city. Since the issue of the mandatory ministerial guidelines from 2015 onwards, new developments have been actively encouraged to increase the height and density of new developments in material contravention to development plans. High-rise development, which we define as buildings that are substantially higher than their surroundings, became prevalent and deemed suitable for most locations. The criteria for overriding the provisions of the development plan can be satisfied by the developer in most cases. The ministerial guidelines, in our view, are overly permissive and do not result in sustainable development. For the most part, the democracy of the development plan and the ambition for the future which it contains have been sacrificed in favour of fast-track delivery of housing. So, since 2015, successive housing ministers have legislated to make housing policies in the development plan redundant. This must change. Best practice planning of our city with and for the citizen has been abandoned. While new development plans continue to be prepared by the local authorities, the chapters relating to housing have become largely irrelevant when it comes to high-rise, high-density developments. Where the local authorities attempt to counteract certain aspects of the ministerial guidelines, as Dermot have described earlier in relation to build to rent, they are unlikely to succeed with the current legislation. Earlier this week, with regard to the draft Dublin City Council Development Plan, the Office of the Planning Regulator made the following comment in their submission. The Office is concerned that the extent of requirements for local area plans in the development plan has the potential to delay housing delivery in key locations. But just think about it, the local area plans are there to provide sustainable, prepared democratically with the citizens' interest. They promote proper planning in areas with potential for significant development in the short term. In referring to the policy of the central government's housing supply targets elsewhere in their submission, the Office of the Planning Regulator achieves the opposite of the aim of the development of the local area plans by promoting fast track in considered development. So the map on the screen shows the number of housing applications, over 100 units, which have been submitted to Ranelagh under the fast track SHD system between April 2018 and November 2021. It gets worse when you zoom in. You can pretty hardly see the decisions. When you look at it this way. So, as you can see, these large-scale applications are dispersed throughout the city, so they're everywhere. Most are yet to be constructed, so that's quite important. We haven't seen the results of most of this. This has started in 2015. A lot of these are speculative, and a lot of these are still going through the tender process and then through the procurement. We argue that such developments, due to their high visual, social and environmental impact, should remain regulated by local authorities. Frequently located on infilled city sites within existing low or medium density neighbourhoods, the subjects of these fast-track, large-scale planning applications are patently bad, overdeveloped, unsustainable housing trends destroying the receiving environment. Presented as individual monuments, they disregard the existing urban grain and density. They unsuccessfully attempt to hide their massing and scale through minimal setbacks and an array of finishing materials. Planning applications for such developments frequently present them in isolation with carefully selected views restricting the relationship to their receiving environment. The cumulative impact of this sheer quantity of high-rise, high-density developments has not been as yet assessed by our government or the unworking law. Each planning application is assessed independently from the next. Our government's objective for such development was to enable fast-track delivery of housing units. While as an objective to overcome the current housing crisis this makes sense, what we have seen is profit-driven delivery of primarily built-to-rent, co-living and student housing. These three typologies have been granted special status through ministerial guidelines through relaxed standards, and therefore became the cheapest types to deliver and yield most profit. To-buy and family-sized units are almost entirely excluded, again through provisions of ministerial guidelines. The local housing need to justify large-scale rental, co-living and student housing developments has been presented through one-sided narrative of the developers' own planning reports. So there has been very little independent local government assessment of the need for such developments within specific communities. Built-to-rent housing typology is most common in the recent large-scale housing applications. The main issues associated with this type of development are reduced space and amenity standards specific to built-to-rent, separating renters from owners in terms of quality of apartments, delivery of largely studio and one-bedroom units and very few family-sized apartments, unaffordable rents reliant on Ireland's dysfunctional rental system, and funding of such developments primarily comes from companies structured to pay little or no tax in Ireland. Smaller scale builders and developers cannot compete on that level. So, the role of the citizen in planning. The central government's ministerial guidelines overrode the development plan provisions for local height, density and housing mix and separated the citizen from the shaping of the city. They removed the democratic right of appeal by taking large-scale planning applications directly to the proposed law. At Dublin Democratic Planning Alliance, we'd like to see the return of meaningful community engagement in the planning process. The construction industry's continuous narrative of locals objecting to all development in principle is not helpful. We believe higher densities can be achieved through better design, removal of blanket ministerial guidelines, and with community engagement. So, as an example, I'll speak about the Crossguns SHD development in Phibsborough, Dublin 7. Phibsborough is a well-connected Dublin 7 neighbourhood. It is recognised as a low-density Victorian neighbourhood under the current Dublin City Council Development Plan. Its centre at the junction of North Circular Road and Phibsborough Road is an architectural conservation area. A local area plan was prepared for Phibsborough in 2012. The function of a local area plan is to take a detailed look at a specific area, particularly areas which require urban renewal or where a large-scale development is expected, before establishing and setting out principles for the future development of this area. Through several rounds of consultation and assessment of many aspects of Phibsborough as a locality, a comprehensive document presented a vision for the future of Phibsborough, which identified the key development sites. So this is an extract from the document. And the Crossguns site is just the at the south end of it, to the bottom of the coloured image. So the Crossguns at Brownfield site of the old flour mills was one of the key development sites identified. It was linked to adjacent areas, so just to the north of it, so across the canal, jointly considered in terms of high density and amenities. So these 3 sites were identified as suitable for denser development and other civic communities within Phillipsburg. Since 2007, 4 attempts have been made to develop the Crossgun site. In 2014, planning was granted for a development which complied with the provisions of the local area plan in terms of height density, provision of open space, and provision of community facilities for the local kayak club. The development was reasonably dense, and it was received well by the community, so there was pretty much no objections to it, even though in terms of its height and density it exceeded that of its adjacent neighbourhood, which is largely 2-storey Victorian terraces. The development provided new housing as a mix of apartments up to 6 stories height with private dwellings to the south. The 2018 Development and Building Height Guidelines issued by the central government and the introduction of fast-track planning process which bypassed the local authority created an opportunity for the developer to revert to earlier and much denser proposals for the site. It made possible an application for a higher and denser build-to-rent development with its lucrative financing options. In 2021, revised proposals were submitted to the Untitled, which contradicted the provisions of both the local area plan and the Dublin City Council development plan. They presented the massing and volume of pre-2014 planning applications previously rejected by Untitled on the grounds of massing and scale and relationship to the receiving environment. The 2021 proposals were granted planning permission. The Ranelagh inspector disregarded significant reasons for refusal presented by Dublin City Council, Waterways Ireland and the Irish Rail, who undertake noisy repair works to their fleet near the site. The proposals bluntly disregard their receiving environment, as can be seen on this diagram, and the expensive rental housing of the built-to-rent structure does not meet local housing needs. There is substantial opposition within the community to the proposals, which resulted in a judicial review case which is still ongoing. This outcome serves neither the developer nor the community. Ranelagh is also a casualty, as the legality of its decision-making process is being questioned on 6 separate grounds deemed valid by a High Court judge. Crossguns is an example of a brownfield site in close proximity to the centre of Dublin, with good transport connections and the amenity of the Royal Canal. Success of previous planning application demonstrated community support for development on the site. The changes in the planning legislation since 2015 quite clearly made the 2014 planning grant appear less lucrative and led to a new application for excessive height and density, thus removing the goodwill of the community. So in conclusion, the Dublin Democratic Planning Alliance seeks to re-establish the contract between the citizen and the state. Rather than being superseded by centralisation of power, subsidiarity, the principle of prioritising local level knowledge and decision-making, should be the core value of planning. This includes local authorities' decision on suitable housing density, plot ratio, housing type and mix, and additional services and infrastructure that are required for such developments. We consider piecemeal, high-rise dense development which does not relate to its neighbourhoods to be an issue. It does not form sustainable communities. The density associated with such developments is comparable to Manhattan and should not be encouraged in Ireland. We would like to see new housing in Dublin forming part of a coherent master plan, shaped by the local needs, reasonable densities and good urban planning. We need the primacy of the development plan to be reinstated and the ministerial housing planning guidelines removed.
I think you speak for all of us there. Very interesting. And the examples you chose just explain it so clearly. So thank you for that. So what I suggest we do now is we'll move this table out of the way and we'll invite the speakers to join in. We can sit here and then we can take a few questions and see how people want to move it on from there.